Welcome to the Explainer. Let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're embarking on a purely analytical exploration of a really fascinating piece of ancient philosophy. We're going to look closely at one specific verse from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 12, along with its detailed commentary. What we really want to unpack today is how this specific text views the ideas of material entanglement, human ambition, and what it defines as ultimate spiritual delusion. We're going to look at this strictly through the lens of the source material, stepping through its unique worldview so you can see exactly how these arguments are constructed.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, decoding Bhagavad Gita 9.12. Second, the anatomy of delusion. Third, the core theological misconception. And finally, the cosmic consequences.
All right, section 1, decoding Bhagavad Gita 9.12, the root verse and its startling claims. Now, the uncompromising stance this verse takes right out of the gate is pretty fascinating. The English translation reads, "Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demonic and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated." It's incredibly striking from an analytical perspective. The text uses this absolute final language, words like defeated and deluded condition, to describe the state of someone it considers to be bewildered by these views. Moving on to section 2, the anatomy of delusion, peeling back the layers of a baffled mind. So you might be wondering, what exactly does the text mean by fruitive activities, which is translated from the Sanskrit mogha-karmāṇo? Well, in plain English, it refers to pious or worldly actions performed specifically for personal gain, material reward, or, a fruitful outcome. Think of it as a kind of transactional morality. It's doing good deeds, participating in rituals, or even just working hard, but doing all of that primarily because you're expecting a specific, tangible reward in return. The source claims that if someone is operating from this state of delusion, even these seemingly positive, pious actions are ultimately baffled. They're rendered totally useless. In fact, according to the commentary, there are 3 very specific, major human pursuits that just hit a brick wall when faced with this bewildered mindset. First, hopes for spiritual liberation, meaning the desire to escape material entanglement and suffering. Second, those fruitive pious activities we were just talking about. And third, the culture of spiritual knowledge, like the academic studying of ancient texts such as the Upanishads or the Vedanta Sutra. The text explicitly states that without the correct foundational belief, all 3 of these massive, lifelong pursuits lead absolutely nowhere. But it's not just about physical actions, right? Building on that, the commentary takes aim at the intellect as well. It argues heavily against relying strictly on the power of the human mind to figure it all out. The text asserts that mental speculation alone simply cannot unlock the absolute truth. In fact, relying on it only leads to futility. The author makes the case that if someone tries to understand the divine merely through their own mental gymnastics, or even by rigorously studying Vedic literature without a specific attitude of devotion, it's a trap. It's essentially saying you can't just think or study your way to the ultimate reality if your foundational premises about who or what God is are fundamentally flawed. Which brings us to section 3, the core theological misconception. The primary error according to the commentary. Here, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada identifies a massive, unbridgeable philosophical divide. He points to what he labels a false conclusion, the idea that the ordinary living entity and God become exactly the same upon liberation. This is generally known as monism, the concept that we're all one, and I am ultimately the same as God once I shed this physical body. Conversely, the textual reality presented by this tradition argues that the supreme divine has an eternal, distinct form that is fundamentally different from a temporary material body. The author argues that arriving at that first monistic conclusion through mental speculation is the ultimate grand delusion. And holding that monistic view, well, that leads to what the text calls the great offense. Considering Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead, to be an ordinary man covered by material nature. This is the central theological error identified in the source material. It's the fundamental mistake of equating the eternal divine with the temporary mundane. The text argues that if you look at the divine and just see a regular human being with a material body, you are fundamentally deriding the absolute truth. And doing so renders all your other spiritual practices completely void. This next part brilliantly illustrates just how seriously this tradition takes that offense. The commentary pulls in a quote from another ancient text, the Brihad Vishnu Smriti, to really hammer the point home. It reads, "One who considers the body of Krishna to be material should be driven out from all rituals, And if one by chance sees his face, one should at once take bath in the Ganges to rid himself of infection. Now, regardless of your personal beliefs, from an analytical standpoint, you just have to appreciate the sheer intensity of this injunction. It demonstrates exactly how strictly this specific theological framework guards against materializing the divine. It treats that philosophical misconception quite literally like a spiritual and physical infection that you have to be washed clean of.
Finally, Section 4, the cosmic consequences, the progressive regression of the soul.
The text outlines a steep, progressive cosmic descent for those trapped in this specific misconception. The destiny laid out here is highly specific. Step 1 is a perpetual condition of mental delusion. Essentially, your real knowledge remains permanently blocked from you. Step 2 involves the cycle of reincarnation, but specifically taking repeated rebirths into what the text calls atheistic and demonic species. And finally, Step 3 is a gradual regression to the darkest region of creation. It is a striking, definitive trajectory. The source is arguing that a fundamental error in how you perceive the divine doesn't just result in some minor detour. It triggers a profound downward cosmic regression.
So, what does this all mean? It leaves us with a rather profound question to consider. How does our fundamental perception of the divine ultimately shape our own reality? Whether you agree with the specific theology of Bhagavad Gita 9.12 or not, the text presents a fascinating, highly structured argument. It claims that the core assumptions we make about the nature of the universe and the nature of the absolute act as the blueprint for our ultimate destiny. It suggests that our worldview isn't just some passive opinion, it's the very mechanism that drives our reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this provided a clear, engaging look into this fascinating source material.